Imagine standing on the edge of the ocean calm. Waves touching your feet, the sky looks peaceful. Everything feels normal, but what if we tell you that right below this calm surface, the earth is broken open, not cracked slightly, but ripped apart deeper than anywhere else on the planet? There is a place where sunlight has never reached, where pressure is so brutal that steel bends like paper, where the human body would collapse in less than a second. And yet, this place exists right now beneath us. For centuries, we believed the ocean floor was flat and lifeless, a silent, empty world with nothing worth discovering, until one day a rope kept going down and down and down and refused to stop. That single moment changed how we see our planet forever. This is not just a story about depth. This is a story about human curiosity, about fear, about obsession, and about how far we are willing to go to prove that no place is truly unreachable. Today, we are diving into the deepest wound of the earth, a place so extreme that even the planet seems uncomfortable, revealing that this is the Marianas Trench. For a very long time, humans believed the ocean was simple, deep, yes, mysterious, maybe, but mostly flat, silent, and unchanging. We looked at maps and imagined the seafloor as a calm, empty plain stretching endlessly beneath the waves. No mountains, no valleys, no scars, and honestly, no one questioned it because no one had ever seen it. Technology was limited, curiosity was controlled, and the ocean kept its secrets locked away in darkness. Then in the year 1872, something changed. A British research ship called HMS Challenger set out on what would become the most important ocean expedition in human history, not for war, not for conquest, but for understanding. Their mission was simple. On paper map, the ocean floor. At the time, this sounded almost pointless. Most people believed there was nothing worth mapping down there. The crew crossed the oceans for nearly 4 years, traveling more than 70,000 miles, almost a third of the distance from Earth to the moon every 140 miles. They stopped lowering thick ropes into the sea attached to hundreds of pounds of lead. No machines, no screens, no satellites, just men, rope, and patience. The process was exhausting, slow, and brutal. They pulled wet, heavy rope back onto the deck again and again, often for hours, sometimes in terrible weather, sometimes in total silence, and most of the time, the results were boring. The rope hit the bottom at predictable depths, confirming what everyone already believed until the ship reached the western Pacific, about 200 miles from the island of Guam. The crew lowered the rope like they had done countless times before, expecting the same result. But the rope kept going and going and going. Minutes passed, then more. The weight did not stop at first. They thought something had gone wrong. Maybe the rope snapped, maybe the weight detached, but it had not. It just kept descending into darkness. When it finally touched the bottom, the reading shocked everyone on board. 4,470. 5 fathoms, nearly 5 miles deep. Nothing like this had ever been recorded before. This was not just deep, this was impossible according to everything they believed. Suddenly, the ocean was no longer flat. It was wounded, a massive unseen feature hidden beneath the waves, waiting for someone to notice. That single measurement shattered centuries of assumptions. If the ocean floor could drop this far here, what else was hiding below? Was this a hole, a crack, or something much larger? No one had answers. Challenger expedition returned home carrying data that raised more questions than it solved. They had discovered a mystery, but they could not explain it, and for decades that mystery remained untouched because humans still lack the tools to truly see the ocean floor. It would take war, fear, and a completely different purpose to finally unlock the next chapter. For nearly 75 years, that impossible depth stayed unanswered. The data existed. The shock remained. But humans still could not see what was actually down there. We knew something massive was hiding beneath the Western Pacific. But knowing and seeing are two very different things. The ocean was still winning. Then technology stepped in. Not from curiosity, but from fear. In the early 20th century, nations were preparing for underwater warfare. Submarines were becoming invisible threats, and the need to detect them changed everything. Sound became the weapon. Scientists discovered that sound waves could travel long distances underwater, bounce off solid objects, and return with information. This system became known as sonar at first. It was built to hunt submarines, but someone realized something powerful if sound could find a steel submarine, it could also find the ocean floor suddenly. The invisible world beneath the waves had a voice by the 1940s sonar technology had advanced rapidly, and after the war scientists gained access to this powerful tool in 1951, a British research vessel returned to the same location near Guam, the same place where the rope had vanished into darkness decades earlier, but this time no ropes were needed, sound pulses were sent into the deep echoes returned, and the ocean finally revealed its shape. What appeared on the sonar map stunned everyone. This was not a hole, this is a trench, a massive scar stretching across the UN. Ocean floor longer than entire countries, deeper than any mountain is tall. The Marianas Trench extended for more than 1,500 miles, running like a giant wound from the southeast of Guam to the northwest of the Mariana Islands in some places. The ocean floor dropped suddenly, in others it twisted and folded like crushed metal mountains. Rose valleys collapsed, and the idea of a smooth, peaceful seafloor was completely destroyed. Even within the trench, the depths were not uniform at its southern, and the readings became even more extreme. The seafloor dropped another 2 miles, 7 miles beneath the surface. This was the lowest point on Earth, the deepest place known to exist. It was named Challenger Deep in honor of the ship that first hinted at its existence. To understand this depth, we have to change how we imagine scale. If Mount Everest were placed at the bottom of this trench, its peak would still be buried beneath more than a mile of water. That realization alone rewrote geology. But one question refused to go away. Why was the Earth torn open here? What force could create something this deep, this long? This violent maps gave shape, but they did not give answers, and so a new idea emerged. If we want to understand the trench, we have to go there, not with sound, not with maps, but with human eyes. That decision came with a terrifying reality. The bottom of the trench, the pressure is beyond imagination, more than 1,000 times the pressure at the surface, enough to crush steel, enough to destroy submarines, enough to erase human life instantly. This was no longer exploration. This was survival, and yet someone was willing to try. Knowing how deep the trench was created a new kind of fear. This was no longer about maps or measurements. This was about pressure, pure, crushing, unstoppable pressure. At 7 miles below the surface, the ocean does not forgive. It does not adapt. Destroys down there, the pressure reaches more than 16,000 pounds per square inch. That is like being crushed from every direction by the weight of dozens of jumbo jets. Human body is not built for that. Bones collapse, organs fail, air disappears. To prove just how extreme this environment is, scientists performed a simple experiment. They took a styrofoam head, something soft, light, flexible. They placed it inside a pressure chamber and increased the pressure until it matched what exists at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. When the chamber was opened, the result was shocking. The head had shrunk to a fraction of its original size. Not crushed violently, but squeezed so completely that every pocket of air had vanished. If a human skull were placed there, it would not shrink, it would shatter. That demonstration made one thing clear: no human could ever survive at that depth without protection. So the question shifted: how do you protect a human from an environment that wants to erase them? The answer required radical engineering. Ideas that sounded impossible. In 1953, a Swiss scientist named Auguste Piccard introduced a solution. A deep-sea submersible unlike anything ever built. It was called Trieste. The design was strange, almost absurd: a long hull filled with aviation gasoline, chosen not for fuel, but because it was lighter than water, and nearly incompressible. Heavy lead weights controlled buoyancy, allowing the craft to sink and rise, and beneath it all hung the most important part: a tiny spherical cabin, only 6 feet wide, with steel walls 5 inches thick. A shape chosen for one reason: to survive pressure. Years passed with test dives, modifications, failures, repairs. The deepest dives reached only 3.5 miles, still far from the goal. Every attempt carried risk. Every descent tested the limits of metal and math, but eventually the moment arrived in January 1960. Trieste was ready. The mission was kept quiet, almost secret. Failure was not an option, but embarrassment was feared. The launch point was the island of Guam, remote, quiet, perfect for something this dangerous too. Men climbed inside the steel sphere dome Walsh, a U.S. Navy lieutenant and deep-sea explorer, and Jacques Piccard, engineer, oceanographer, and son of the man who designed the vessel, once sealed inside. There was no turning back. They had less space than a household refrigerator. The temperature was freezing. The walls were inches away from their faces when Trieste began to sink. The surface light faded quickly. The ocean turned dark, then darker, then completely black by 3,000 feet. Sunlight was gone. What remained was pressure, silence, and the unknown, and this was only the beginning. As Trieste continued sinking, the world above felt farther away with every minute. The ocean pressed harder, the darkness became heavier, and time started to feel strange. The descent was slow, only about 3 miles per hour, painfully slow. There was no window to the outside world, only thick glass steel and instruments outside. The temperature dropped close to freezing. Inside the cabin, their breath turned visible. Condensation formed on the metal walls. At these depths, sound behaves differently. Every creak, every small vibration feels amplified. They passed 18,000 feet, breaking their previous depth record. Everything still looks stable, but stability down here is always temporary. As they sank deeper, something unexpected happened. Sudden loud cracking sound exploded through the cabin. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise was sharp, violent, impossible to ignore. They checked every gauge, every control, every system. The source was quickly identified. The outer layer of one of the viewing windows had cracked. That window was designed with 2 layers, a thick outer pane and an inner pane separating them from the ocean. At that depth, every square inch of glass was holding back tons of pressure. If the inner window failed, death would be instant. There would be no warning, no reaction time, no escape. The ocean would rush in faster than the brain could process. Inside the still sphere, they made a decision. They would continue turning. Back meant learning nothing. Reaching the bottom meant changing history. So Trieste kept descending past 20,000 feet, then 25,000. Outside, there was nothing but blackness. No reference, no horizon, but suddenly something flickered. Tiny flashes of light appeared around them, bioluminescent creatures, living fireflies of the deep. Even here, life had found a way. That realization changed everything. If life could exist here, then the trench was not just a grave. It was a world. Hours passed. The pressure increased. The silence deepened. Finally, the descent slowed. Instruments indicated they were approaching the bottom. Moments before touching down, they saw movement. A flatfish, roughly a foot long, resting on the seafloor. This should not have been possible. Every scientific assumption said nothing should survive here, but there it was, alive. Trieste settled gently onto the bottom of the trench. Depth gauge read nearly 36,000 feet, almost 7 miles beneath the surface. At that moment, 2 humans were closer to the center of the earth than anyone had ever been. They had reached the deepest point on the planet, the Challenger. Deep inside the steel sphere, they exchanged looks. Not celebration, not excitement, just disbelief. The impossible had become real, but the mission was not over. They wanted to observe, to study, to understand. As Trieste rested on the seafloor, fine powdery sediment began to rise. The bottom was soft, like dust. Within minutes, visibility dropped to 0. It felt like being trapped inside a bowl of milk. They waited, but the sediment refused to settle. Time at that depth is dangerous. Every extra minute increases risk. With vision gone and pressure unrelenting, they made the only safe choice. It was time to leave. Weights were released, and slowly Trieste began its long journey back toward the surface. As Trieste began to rise, the silence inside the cabin felt different. Heavier but calmer. They had survived the impossible. Now they just had to make it back. The ascent was slow, even slower than the descent. Rushing upward could be just as deadly as staying too long below. The released ballast allowed the vessel to float upward gradually, inch by inch, through layers of pressure that still wanted to crush it outside. Nothing changed visually. Still darkness, still cold, but inside something had shifted. They knew they had crossed a boundary no human had ever crossed before. Hours passed. The instruments remained stable. The cracked outer window held. Every minute felt borrowed. Eventually, faint traces of blue began to appear, the first sign of returning toward the surface light after nearly 10 hours without it. When Trieste finally broke through the waves near Guam, the ocean looked strangely ordinary, calm. Peaceful, unaware of what had just happened beneath it, the mission had been kept quiet, but the result could not be hidden. January 23rd, 1960. Humans had reached the deepest point on Earth. Don Walsh and Jacques Picard stepped out of the steel sphere, cold, exhausted, but alive. They had proven something powerful, that even the most hostile environment on the planet could be reached if engineering and courage worked together. But something unexpected happened. After their return, the world did not rush to follow. No immediate wave of deep trench exploration, no fleets of submersibles racing downward. Instead, silence. The trench remained mostly untouched for decades because the truth was uncomfortable. There was no obvious reward, no treasure, no immediate benefit, only knowledge, and knowledge alone was not enough to justify the risk at the time. Yet, the impact of that dive quietly reshaped science. It forced geologists to rethink how the Earth works, how tectonic plates collide, how trenches form, how the planet releases internal stress. The Marianas Trench was no longer just a depth record. It became evidence that the Earth is alive, moving, folding, breaking slowly, relentlessly. The dive also shattered assumptions about life. If organisms could survive in total darkness, crushing pressure, near freezing temperatures, then life was far more adaptable than anyone imagined. That realization would later influence how we search for life beyond Earth, on icy moons, on distant oceans, on planets we have never touched. And yet, despite all this, no one returned to Challenger Deep for more than half a century. The deepest place on Earth remained almost completely unexplored. A reminder that reaching something once does not mean we understand it. Even today, we have mapped more of the surface of Mars than we have of our own ocean floor. The trench is still down there, 7 miles beneath the waves, silent, dark, patient, waiting, not as a challenge, but as a question. How much of our planet do we truly know, and how much are we still afraid to face? Standing on land, it is easy to believe we understand our planet. We see mountains, we cross oceans, we map continents. It feels familiar, controlled, almost conquered. But the Marianas Trench tells a different story. It reminds us that the Earth is not built for comfort, it is built for power. Beneath the calmest waters lies a force capable of crushing steel, bending technology, and humbling intelligence. We reach the deepest point once, and then we stop, not because we could not return, but because we were not ready to face what it represented. The trench is not just deep, it is a boundary reminder that knowledge has limits, and courage has costs. Every meter downward is a negotiation with physics. Every decision is weighed against survival. That is why the deepest places remain mostly untouched, not because they are empty, but because they are honest. They show us how small we really are. Ocean does not care about records or names or history. It does not remember the Challenger or Trieste, or the people who risked everything to reach its bottom. It simply exists, silent, pressurized, endless, and yet we keep returning to its edge because curiosity is stronger than fear. We want to know what lies beyond the light, beyond the safe, beyond the known. The Marianas Trench is proof that exploration is not about conquest. It is about understanding our place, a place where technology meets humility, where ambition meets reality. Even today, the trench continues to shape the planet. Tectonic plates collide, the crust bends, energy is released. Earth is still changing, still alive, and somewhere 7 miles beneath the surface, that massive wound remains, unseen, unforgiving, unfinished. One day we will return with better machines, stronger materials, sharper questions, not to prove we can survive there, but to learn why it exists. Because the deepest mysteries are never truly about depth. They're about how far we are willing to go to understand the world that created us. After decades of silence, the trench slowly began to call us back. Not loudly, not urgently, but persistently. Technology had changed, materials had improved, and curiosity had grown sharper. What once felt impossible now felt unfinished. Robotic explorers became our eyes. Unmanned vehicles descended where humans could not stay, sending back images from a world still almost untouched. High-definition cameras, pressure-resistant sensors, mechanical arms moving through darkness. For the first time, the trench was not just a number. It was a place, a landscape of soft sediment, jagged rock, and strange fragile life creatures without eyes. Bodies adapted to pressure, movement that felt alien. These organisms did not fight the environment, they surrendered to it. In doing so, they survived. Every new image challenged our assumptions. Every sample rewritten textbook's life did not need sunlight. Life did not need warmth. Life needed balance. That realization reached far beyond the ocean. It reshaped how we think about survival, about adaptation, about possibility. If life could exist here, then it could exist almost anywhere under ice, inside darkness. Beneath pressure, the trench became more than geology. It became inspiration. Engineers studied it to design stronger materials. Scientists studied it to understand plate tectonics. Astrobiologists studied it to imagine life beyond Earth. And still, for all this progress, most of the trench remains unseen, mapped by sound, touched by machines, but rarely witnessed. We know its outline, but not its details. We know its depth, but not its story. Each expedition answers one question and creates 10 more. Why? Does this trench cut deeper than any other? How does it continue to shape the planet? What secrets are still buried beneath? Miles of water and pressure. The deeper we look, the more we realize how early we are in understanding. Exploration did not end with Trieste. It only paused, waiting for the right moment, the right tools, the right questions, and that moment is slowly returning. Submersibles are being designed stronger, smarter, more precise, not to chase records, but to chase understanding. The goal is no longer to say we were there. Goal is to listen, because the trench is not silent. It records the movement of the Earth, the collision of plates, the slow recycling of crust back into the planet. It is part of a process older than humanity and far more powerful. We are visitors. Brief, fragile, curious. The Marianas Trench does not exist for us, but it teaches us, it shows that the planet is not finished revealing itself, and we are not finished asking questions. The deepest place on Earth is not a destination, it is an invitation.